Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Today I have Ambassador Yechiel Leiter with me. Thank you so much for joining me. He is Israel's ambassador to Washington. Thank you for joining today.
It's good to be with you, Tudor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So obviously we want to talk about what is going on in the Middle East. There's so much happening. We know that there is the ceasefire, but we've had some breaches and Israel has taken action. Do you expect that to be sort of a back and forth for a while, or what are you expecting in this ceasefire?
Well, Tudor, nobody really knows because this has never been done before. Hamas occupies an area which is originally 24 miles long and 8 miles wide with 2.2 million people and terror tunnels that are 450 miles of networking. And you have to understand it's basically a city underground, a terror city, which initially has some 50,000 armed terrorists to the teeth. Now we've degraded them considerably. We're sitting on a little over 50% of the territory now, and making sure that the tunnels are eliminated, that no terrorists go into that area. And we're very enthused and encouraged by the ceasefire that the president has really invested in. President Trump did something really incredible through his envoys, Secretary of State Rubio, Vice President Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, because basically not only did we get the 20 live hostages out, which nobody thought could be done, except the Prime Minister of Israel, who stuck to his guns throughout this entire process and said, we got to get all the hostages out. We still have 13 deceased hostages we have to get out, and according to the agreement, they're committed to doing that. But nobody thought that we'd achieve the commitment for complete disarming of Hamas and the demilitarization of Gaza. And that's really the great success of the agreement. Now, the problem is it needs to be implemented. But we do have a firm commitment by all those signed on to the agreement that this will be the case. We cannot have ever again jihadis living on our border. What happened on October 7th cannot be repeated again, whether it's in Gaza or in South Lebanon or on the Syrian border. We're a very small country. We're a tiny country. I mean, we can fit into Indiana 4 times. We fit into Nebraska about 7 times. We don't have territory to give up, and we certainly cannot have jihadis on our border committed to our destruction. So we've gone through this year degrading the Iranian proxies. We've degraded Hamas. We've degraded Hezbollah. Assad has fallen in Syria. Together with the United States, we dramatically degraded Iran, the head of the snake. But we still need to see this deal that the president has brokered implemented, and that's going to be a challenge. But we're hoping it's going to work.
Well, let me ask you, you are an American-born Israeli. You lived in the United States until you were 18. Is that correct?
That's correct. Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Oh, you're a Scranton guy. Your Scranton guy did not get this done for you, though. It was Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. I mean, don't hold Scranton against me. I was just born there. My bank actually is still on Joe Biden Boulevard. So there's right. But yes, this agreement came through President Trump. Absolutely.
Well, so I wanted to bring that up because obviously you grew up the way most of us and most of my listeners grew up here in the United States. Obviously, then you moved to Israel, so you have seen both sides of that. I think many Americans have no idea what we're actually dealing with when you talk about the Gaza-Israel battle that has been going on for years. But you brought up the fact that this is like a city underground. That's something that we don't actually hear a lot about. We've heard kind of grumblings of there's these tunnels and that makes it a challenge. But you said something about, 250 miles of tunnels, and this is entire
450 miles. It's
450 miles. Explain that a little bit to us, because I don't think that we have a good comprehension of what we're dealing with. These are not citizens in these tunnels, right? This is Hamas.
Absolutely. We're talking about Hamas. I think the best way to explain it would be to ask your viewers, your listeners, to imagine MS-13. Okay, a gang, a well-known gang in the United States, takes over a city. And under that city, they create underground tunnels to protect themselves. So they can shoot missiles into the surrounding areas, and then you can't really respond because they run into the tunnels. And to shoot back would mean to kill many civilians. That's the dilemma that we've been in repeatedly. How do you defeat an enemy that both uses above ground and underground facilities? As a matter of fact, the most accomplished expert on urban warfare, John Spencer, who teaches at West Point, has said repeatedly that no army in the world has ever had to confront what we had to confront in Gaza. And, you know, the ratio, it's terrible. Every death is terrible. Every innocent death is terrible. And we did everything we could possibly do to limit a collateral damage, non-combatant damage. And quite frankly, if we did what we're being accused of doing, of, you know, killing civilians without any measure, my son might be alive today. I mean, look, he went in, he led forces into Gaza by foot seeking terrorists. Now, if we just strafe bomb the population centers, as democratic armies have done all over the world, I don't want to mention any names, right? But if you strafe bomb population centers, you'll ultimately get to the terrorists, but you're also going to kill many, many civilians. Our ratio was better than the ratio that the U.S. had in Mosul, for example, which was 1 to 3. We're at about 1 to 1.5. That's a tremendously, it's hard to say successful ratio, but it's war. And in war, that's a very unusual ratio. And Spencer has made the point that no one has ever had to deal with this kind of complicated warfare. We've done it really with two hands tied behind our back, because not only were there civilians there, but they were holding our civilians. They were holding our hostages, right? So we wanted to prevent civilian deaths, and of course, from that affecting our hostages as well. So it was very complicated, a very difficult challenge that we face. But overall, we've degraded the Iranian proxies. Iran had this idea that they would create a ring of fire. Okay, how do you destroy Israel, which has a strong, very strong conventional army? So they had this idea of a ring of fire. They'd have Hamas in the southwest, the Houthis in the southeast, Hezbollah in the north, the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, Iraq, and everybody would attack at the same time. And because we're such a small country, I mean, the whole country is like 40 miles wide, right? So they would shoot missiles at the same time into the center of the country. The center of the country is where 70% of our population is. So if all of these proxies attacked at the same time and our reservists couldn't get out of the center of the country to the periphery, we'd be destroyed. That was the idea. And Sinwar, the leader of Hamas at the time, simply jumped the gun. He didn't wait for everybody else. And had he not done that, we would have been in a much more difficult predicament. So this way we were able to confront Hamas and then confront Hezbollah. And what we've done is we've changed the Middle East, because Hamas is degraded, Hezbollah is degraded. We have a government in Lebanon that really wants peace, that talks about disarming Hezbollah. The Assad regime, that cruel, murderous regime in Damascus, has fallen. There's a leader there that's now talking about, at least talking about, we have to give him a chance, creating a civil society. And Iran has been tremendously degraded because of the incredible partnership that we have with the United States, the intel sharing, the air forces that shared with each other's capabilities. And we created something just absolutely astounding. We obliterated, as the president said, the Iran nuclear program, which is an existential threat to Israel.
You talk about the importance of doing this, but it's also very important to you and very personal to you, because your son, you mentioned your son, he was an IDF soldier. He went into, was it one of these tunnels that he went into where he lost his life in battle?
Well, my son was spent 15 years in special ops. He'd actually trained together with Delta Force. He was Air Force Special Ops. And at the age of 33, he decided to leave, although he was in line to take command of the unit. And he went to med school because he said, I spent 15 years in the Army. I now want to spend the rest of my life saving lives. And he had completed med school, actually, just before the war. He got his white jacket on August 2023. And he was the oldest of my 8 children.
Just before the war.
Just before the war. Yeah, he was supposed to start his rounds in the hospital on October 8th, day after the attack. Yeah. But that he was the father of 6 children, and he was my oldest, the oldest of 8 children. He was my best friend. He was an incredible human being. And he led forces. Actually, the forces entered Gaza in kind of a pyramid, and he was the lead company because he was so smart and really a field fox, and he understood the field of battle. And on Friday, November 10th, he received an order to find the shaft of a tunnel in the northern town of Gaza called Beit Hanun, which was, according to intel, in a mosque. And he took his command team, they scoured the mosque, they didn't find it, and he didn't give up, even though he could have pulled back and said, I didn't find it, it's over, but he knew there was a tunnel there from which they were exiting and firing missiles into Ashkelon, so he said, we have to do this, and he never gave up on an assignment. So he continued to scour the area around the mosque, and in the second building, he went into an inner room and found the shaft to the tunnel, and as soon as he wired to the forces, we found the tunnel, and he said Shabbat Shalom, which means, Friday afternoon you wish each other a happy Sabbath. He wished everybody a happy Sabbath, and then they set off a booby trap, which was a very, very powerful explosion, which they set off from inside the tunnel. They followed them in a hidden camera, and they waited for soldiers to come into that room, find the shaft. And the explosion was so strong that it blew out their lower torso and then brought down the walls on them from the top, so they really didn't have a chance. So he, together with 3 of his command team, were killed. And it really is indicative of the quality and the commitment and the resilience of our soldiers as a whole. You have to understand, next to my oldest son was my 4th son, who was a soldier of his. And he was 30 meters away from the explosion. He basically saw his brother, go up to heaven. And my second son was on the northern border opposite Hezbollah. And my third child, daughter, her husband is a battalion commander. He was fighting at the same time. It's just one family, but I'm not an exception. All of my kids were on the front. I do have one child with Down syndrome, so he wasn't on the front, but he was packing bags for the soldiers in the base. Everybody's enlisted. Everybody's part. This is a citizen army. And look, the people, the soldiers we lost, over 900. Most I think were reservists. About 60% reservists with families. People who have day jobs. They're bankers, and they're lawyers, and they're engineers, and they have cyber companies, and every regular people. And they left their homes, they left their families, and did, in many cases, 300, 400 days of reserve duty over the past 2 years. So it's been a tremendous national commitment to seeing to it that Israel survive, and we don't allow this attempt by Iran and its proxies to destroy us.
It's very hard because when you are in the United States, you genuinely don't know what is true. We keep hearing all of these stories of people dying in Gaza, and it's devastating. Anytime you hear stories of young people losing their lives, anybody losing their life, it's devastating. But there's also a real manipulation of the media that is coming out of there. And so there is a lot of question as to exactly what is going on. I know that you've talked about the fact that Israel was very careful to warn people, to try to get people out of there, to continue to feed people and take care of people. That is not the story that the media is spinning. So I want you to kind of explain what that's like on the ground and the difference, too, because I know when you look at Israel, this is a very free society and a very modern society. And when you look at Gaza, it is very oppressed by Hamas.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if people would only appreciate the fact that part of what we're doing, I mean, that's not the, initial and primary reason. But at the end of the day, there's potential here for 2 million people living under tyranny to be free. Hamas, when the Hamas opposes you, or you oppose Hamas, you get dropped off a roof. I mean, the day after the ceasefire was announced, what Hamas did was take out the clans who don't agree with them and worked
I don't
against
think
them.
we heard enough about that. I don't think people understand what that meant. That these were families, these were men. Who was it that actually was murdered that day?
These are, we call them clans. They're extended families.
Okay.
And many of them, not everybody in Gaza is Hamas. We estimate of the 2.2 million, there's actually about 350,000 who are, signed, sealed, delivered, committed Hamas people. But, 75% of the population are not committed to Hamas. And among them, you have people who actually oppose Hamas. I mean, remember when Hamas took over in 2006, they took the Fatah people from the Palestinian Authority and they dropped them off buildings, 9 stories high. And now
I think this is the story that we don't hear, because we are living in the United States where it is a very black and white society. It's like one is good, one is bad. And we keep hearing that there are people on one side saying everybody in Gaza supports Hamas. But that is, I mean, you are really saying it's a minority compared to the population.
Well, certainly now. I mean, look, there was a vote. We warned, by the way, we suggested, at the time to the Bush administration, it's not a very good idea to have an election right now because Hamas is going to get elected. So Hamas was elected. There was a majority. They took over through an election. But, there were elections in the Soviet Union. 90% of the population voted for the only candidate. Not everything works the way it does back in Scranton, Pennsylvania, or in Chicago, Illinois. This is the Middle East, and there isn't a long history, of Jeffersonian democracies and the process that the U.S. and the West went through in creating a democratic system. The notion that you could do democracy from the top down is a huge mistake, because democracy is, by its definition, is the power of the people. It has to come up from the bottom. People have to will it. That's why, for example, with the operation against Iran's nuclear facilities, people said, well, why didn't you guys take out the government, the Ayatollahs? Why didn't you eliminate the government? They're causing all the problems. Regime change. Well, you can't do regime change. The people have to do it. The people in Iran have to rise up, and they're trying to, and throw off this dictatorship. So hopefully, if we facilitated the wherewithal for the people of Gaza to say, enough of this, we want something else. Hopefully they won't exchange one tyranny for another one. But what happened as soon as the ceasefire was signed, Hamas just went into these neighborhoods where they're opposing clans, took out the men, lined them up in the street, and it absolutely insisted that crowds came around and cheered. And if you don't cheer when they tell you to cheer, you can be put down on your knees and shot in the back of the head. So people are cheering, and then they just shot them. No, extrajudicial, whoever they are opposed to, don't like, or claim that they're homosexual, or that they worked with Israel. You can make all sorts of claims. They throw homosexuals off rooftops. I mean, it's very, very clear, and it's really just a horrific, ghoulish kind of death cult that we've opposed there. And hopefully the after effect of all of this could be a new Gaza. I mean, the dream of President Trump to create a new Gaza as opposed to an old Gaza can really be something that could serve as a template for other places in the Middle East, right? If you really do it.
But how do you de-radicalize and demilitarize Hamas? I mean, they have, even if it is a minority, I mean, if you're 300, 400,000 strong, and these are very radicalized people, and they have military equipment, how do you get rid of that?
Well, it's a great question. And frankly, my field of academic study is political theory. And I wasn't sure that could really be done. Certainly not in the short term. But I spent time, before I went back into government, in think tanks. And I spent a lot of time in Abu Dhabi. And I'll tell you, I wear a kippah, and I felt more comfortable as a Jew walking around Abu Dhabi, with my head covering, than I do in most European cities. I felt safer in Abu Dhabi as a Jew than I feel in many neighborhoods of London or in Paris, because they have accomplished it. They de-radicalized. They took the Muslim Brotherhood out of the system. No more Muslim Brotherhood teachers, no more Muslim Brotherhood government employees, and they de-radicalized society, and it worked very quickly, as a matter of fact. They proved that it's possible. The UAE is just an exemplar of what can be done. Similarly, in many cases, Bahrain as well. Although it has a larger radical population that's identified with Iran, they have their own issues, but they certainly tried to do that. Morocco, another signatory of the Abraham Accords, same thing. There is an element of society that's radical, but there is within Islam this battle between those who want to reform and live side by side with Judeo-Christian civilization, with the West, and those led by Iran, whether they're Shia or Sunni, who still want to oppose Judeo-Christian civilization, want to oppose the West, and impose Islamic culture upon it. And Israel is like this Judeo-Christian transplant in the middle of the Middle East. So if you make peace with Israel, you make peace with Judeo-Christian civilization. If you try to destroy Israel, what you're really trying to do is destroy Judeo-Christian civilization. And that's why the leader of Iran often says that we're the small Satan and the United States is the big Satan. I mean, that's a theological statement. That's what he really believes. So the importance of this war against Iran and its proxies, not just Hamas, but Iran and all its proxies, is really a war for civilization and for moderation and for accommodation. And when I think about it on a personal level, I know that's what my son died for. He was fighting for civilization. He was fighting for mediation and accommodation. And please God that this can move forward in that direction.
I find it interesting that you sit here and you say there is a way for these societies to live side by side, respect each other, and love one another, because we are seeing that. I mean, you brought up London. We see people in the United States who are saying, gosh, we're so afraid of being in that situation where we have neighborhoods that we're not welcome in anymore. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but how do you know? How do you break that down to someone who doesn't understand the two different cultures?
Well, first of all, you need to study and read and listen to people like yourself, podcasts, and that you're bringing facts and figures to the general public. There are some podcasters that are, on the contrary, that are poisoning people's minds with crazy agendas, really crazy agendas. I mean, I could pick them apart one by one if I had the time, but it's poison. And it's very important that people identify what's true and what is propaganda and what is populism.
What do you think that is behind that? Because it does seem like there's been this sudden rise in that. And actually, I was talking to someone yesterday, and they believe that this is not organic, that there is money behind that. Could that possibly be the case?
Not only possibly, it's definitely the case. Definitely the case. It's a funny thing. When people ask about, there's a question posed just last night. I don't know if this is timely, if it's okay if I
no, go ahead, yeah.
But last night when the vice president was speaking at Ole Miss, and somebody asked about a certain very wealthy American Israeli who contributed to the campaign, and is that not a question of loyalty, and is that acceptable? And I was sorry that the response wasn't like, what about Qatar putting in $7 billion into the university system? How about that kind of influence? You're talking about one person making a large donation. I mean, that's been done from the beginning of time, right? People make donations to campaigns. Sometimes they're Jewish, and sometimes they're Catholic, and sometimes they're Protestant, and sometimes they're Muslim. And as long as the law allows for that, people make big donations. But is it not a question when we see Qatar putting in $7.5 billion in a decade into the university system? Does somebody really mean to say that university professors are not chosen because of the money that they're getting, and that course syllabi are not chosen because of the money they're getting? And does not have anything to do with the fact that as soon as October 7th happened, on October 8th, there were already students running out into the streets with their professors screaming, globalize the Intifada and free Palestine? I had two of my employees here in the Washington embassy, of Israel's Washington embassy, shot dead by somebody screaming, "Free, free Palestine." He was influenced by these crazy, expressions of hate.
And that stunned me because we had that happen in the Capitol, in the U.S. Capitol. 2 staffers of a foreign diplomat of an allied country, and there was barely any media coverage of that. But you make such an incredibly strong point that we don't blink an eye at foreign money that is controlling our universities. I would say it's so much farther beyond it, and whether it is Qatar or China or whatever country it is, these are oftentimes we see adversarial countries that have controlling factions in our universities for our next generation, which we know that if you were to read any history book, they would tell you that the way you change a country is you go to the youth. You go to those people at their most vulnerable time when they are just about to become adults and be out on their own.
Yeah, look, there's so much to talk about here. The accusations against Jews of influence in Israel controlling Washington, and it's all nonsense. I've been in every meeting the prime minister has had with the president. There's a lot of respect there for each other. There's personal respect. There's admiration between the administration officials. I don't think, Prime Minister Netanyahu was the first foreign dignitary to be invited to the White House right after the president came in. Not because he controls Washington. I mean, does anybody really control Donald Trump? I mean, I can say something.
Let's say no.
how can anybody say something so stupid, right? But they make these claims on air, and tens of millions of people listen to this nonsense. When the prime minister came in, we didn't even ask the United States to participate in the bombing of Iran. We came in and said, this is an existential threat. We're going to have to deal with it. These are our options. And it's for you to choose if you want to come in, and when you want to come in, and how you want to come in. And I think when the story is told about the 4 months leading up to Operations Rising Lion and Midnight Hammer, it's going to be studied in international relations faculties for 50 years to come, because the president went through the process of hearing out all the departments, his intelligence departments, the Defense Department, everybody who had an opinion on the subject. He waited. We actually saw the president go through this process and weighing heavily on each side. And he made the decision to say that Israel pressured the United States to, just so stupid. Iran poses a threat to American interests. America wants Abraham Accords. America wants there to be regional alliances. Well, who's in the way of regional alliance? The biggest threat to Saudi Arabia is Iran. So if we can go into an alliance, a military alliance with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with Bahrain, with our old peace partners, Jordan and Egypt, the U.S. could lighten its military footprint in the Middle East and rely more on the regional alliance. And then they can focus more, for example, on Asia. We can create a kind of NATO, so we take responsibility. We're ready to do that. We never asked the United States to put boots on the ground. We fight our own wars. And what we asked for in this war, I'll tell you what we did ask for. We asked for help on missile defense, because we knew we were going to get hit with ballistic missiles. And God bless the American people who helped us with these THAAD and Aegis anti-missile systems. It saved thousands of people's lives.
But you're talking about 50 years from now, this is what we may study. Today, we are hearing something different. And I would argue it is because of those podcasters that you mentioned, which is shocking to me that they would have that much influence. However, they do, because they were supporters of Donald Trump. And I think this magical switch, and they were also strong Christians. And as Christians, we do believe what the Bible tells us, that there is a protection for the remnant, that Israel is important, that we do care for Israel. And yet they have turned against that. That has power when you see someone who is in a position of influence, who claims to be a Christian, who claimed to be a supporter of Donald Trump, to suddenly switch and say, all of this is evil. This whole regime is a problem. This whole connection between America and Israel is somehow dark. You're hearing that from very powerful influential people on the internet. How do you get through that? And how much money could there be that could convince these people to give up their moral values that they claim to have always had and change their narrative so starkly overnight?
Well, I think it's a combination of two things. It's obviously a lot of money. There's a lot of money there, but there's also a lack of personal integrity. I mean, if you say in the name of Christianity, out of the Christianity that I know, and I've studied extensively, there are people who are Christians don't peddle hate; they peddle love. And these people, they're few. They're few. Might be growing, but they're peddling hate. I mean, if you get on the air every single day and find a way to demonize Israel, to delegitimize Jews. I mean, we have questions say like, are we really Jews? Are we the same Jews as the Bible? Do we really carry is the Bible referred to us? I mean, all sorts of, crazy things like that. Look, my ancestors throughout the 2,000-year exile we faced gave their lives for Judaism. I mean, people refused to give up their Judaism and were slaughtered because of it. Community after community after community. I mean, we went from one country of exile to another because we were chased out. I mean, it wasn't only the Spanish Inquisition. There was an Inquisition from England. There was an Inquisition from France. There was an Inquisition from Spain. We were rolling stones for 2,000 years. And why? Because we were loyal to our Judaism. And then we got some yokel get on the line and say, who says that these people are the same Jews as the Bible? We gave our lives for the Jews of the Bible. And most of the Christians that I know, and I go to churches pretty much every Sunday. I'm invited to speak. And I want to tell you, I think they have less power than the perception is. Because certainly in Middle America, where I go out there to churches and meet with people and see the love for Israel and see the willingness and appreciation, sometimes I'm more critical of some of my own co-religionists who are a little hesitant to be, too cozy with other religions. The more confident you are in your religion, the easier it is to celebrate somebody else's. And I celebrate when I see people going to church. I celebrate when I see Christmas lights. I celebrate when I see people speaking in the name of God. It's become almost taboo. But on every dollar bill, we've got "In God We Trust." Is it not possible to say that beyond the dollar bill, "In God We Trust," to wake up in the morning and say, in God I trust"? I mean, the first thing a Jew is obligated to say in the morning is the following line, "Modeh ani lefanecha." I give thanks to you, God, for breathing life into me. And you're supposed to say that even before you wash your hands and face, because the first thing you got to do is enter in a character, right? A life characteristic of giving thanks, right? That's where we should be, of being thankful and of recognizing that we owe our life to a creator.
I think we're easily manipulated, though, because we hear about October 7th. We don't know what October 6th and 5th and every day before was like. We don't know what Israel was going through with Hamas because we were not educated on it. And so now we see this battle that many Americans were gaslit afterward, saying, oh, what you saw, you didn't see. That was manipulated. The rapes didn't happen. The murders didn't happen. The children didn't die. And people somehow started to believe that. They have no idea what the battle was before. They don't understand the history.
Well, Tudor, you're absolutely right. When I was growing up and I heard about Holocaust denial, I said, well, how can people deny the Holocaust? Well, that was 60, 70, 80 years ago. People are denying what happened yesterday, right? On October 8th, you had people saying, well, the women really weren't raped as they were being murdered, right? But they were, and we have the testimonies of the people who saw it. It doesn't matter. That babies were thrown into ovens, that people were decapitated. I know who some of the people who were decapitated, okay? You can't tell me that they weren't, and what, they weren't held hostages either?
And we've seen them come home. That's the thing and we see these families who don't have their people back yet, that they've never received the bodies of their loved ones. We know they exist, and yet somehow people have believed that this didn't happen.
You know, people have asked me why it's so important that we get the bodies back, okay? And first of all, I tell them every family deserves to have a marker of their loved one, to be able to sit next to their loved one in the grave that has, a specific place, and to unite with them, and to talk with them, and have a place to go, know where the body is. But it's of particular importance to us because when we lost 6 million in Auschwitz, they were just ashes that went up in the chimneys into Nazi barbarism. They don't have a grave. They don't have a marker. There's no name. There's no name which says, here lies so-and-so who was born on this date and died on this date. It is incredibly important for us in the state of Israel, the reborn state of Israel after a Holocaust, to have graves. That is part of the change of Jewish history, that we're not, sheep to the slaughter in Auschwitz anymore. That people have to understand. I've heard some people say to me, how is it that you lost your support? On October 8th, everybody was very supportive of Israel, but you lost our support. So, excuse me for being so crass, but the world does okay with dead Jews. They've been doing it for a long time. And on October 8th, those who recognize that we're dead Jews, they have sympathy. When we fight back and we say, no, we are not going to go like lambs to the slaughter, all of a sudden we lose support. And we're accused of the most horrendous things. There was no genocide. Where's all the genocide now? Well, when you have genocide in Darfur, you see bodies, right? There's evidence. They talked about genocide, and what they produced was, I think, 182 bodies. There's no genocide. We're a civilian army. Do you think that our children could actually commit genocide? I mean, the whole thing is just insane. And what they're doing is trying to delegitimize and demonize the state of Israel, call our leaders war criminals, call our soldiers war criminals, with the intent of demonizing Jews. This is no different than the blood libels of the Middle Ages, saying that we poison wells and now we starve people. Starve people? We facilitated the transfer of over 2 million tons of food into Gaza during the war. But people have been told that didn't happen. Yeah. I mean, that's the crazy part about this. People said, "Oh no, they stopped all the aid. They didn't let anything in." Tudor, I was at a meeting with 5 senators who are very critical of Israel. And they said, "Well, what about the food going to Gaza? Why aren't you allowing food into Gaza?" I said, "Senators, we're not preventing food coming into Gaza. Hamas is hijacking the trucks." And that's how they reconstitute themselves. They give it to the people who are fighting with them, and then they sell it to everybody else. They tax it. And one of the senators went like this, "So come on." I said, no, it's 90%. 90%. He said, "No, it's maybe 10%. I said, "No, it's not 10%, it's 90%. A few days later, one of my assistants here went into the UN website, and they have a tracking system. And there, sitting right on the screen, it says, black on white, according to the UN tracking system, 10% is reaching its destination. 90% is being hijacked. Okay?
But we are spoiled by knowledge, and no one has called out the fact that there is not a CBS reporter there. There is not an ABC or a CNN or a Fox reporter, because you cannot have a reporter on the ground in Gaza.
Of course not. What would happen is Hamas would kill them, and then we'd be blamed. Okay? So the important thing is, you just have to keep repeating the truth. It's going up against the grain, but truth is slow. It's always on the defensive, but you have to keep repeating it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today to share the truth with us. I know I kept you longer than you expected, but it was just, the conversation was so good. I really appreciate it. Ambassador Leiter, thank you so much for being here today on the Tudor Dixon Podcast.
Good to be with you, Tudor. All the best of luck.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on the podcast for this episode and others. You can go to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.